This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. On today's program, I want to talk about certain technologies and how these technologies are already impacting your life. Now, we're going to talk about further information that's very important regarding 5G, because 5G is massive. We're going to talk about the interfacing with 5G technology, satellites, artificial intelligence, and computer technology. Then I want to delve into the spiritual dimension, or the parallel universe, or the invisible realm, which is very real, and how what happens in the spiritual world, what happens in the invisible realm, what happens in this other dimension that the Bible talks about from Genesis to Revelation. Long before mankind could get their act together. Mankind is very arrogant, filled with pride. And the so-called scientists, with their so-called scientific method, for a long period of time, and to a large degree today, attempt to dominate human consciousness and human thought by stating, as if it was the truth, that the only thing that we can believe, the only reality that is really real, is the reality that we can perceive with our physical senses, like seeing, hearing, touching, so on and so forth. Now, communism and the French Revolution, the humanistic philosophers of the French Revolution, who were really kind of like the spiritual mothers, spiritual fathers of the communist revolution, those philosophers, they worshipped human reason, human logic. In fact, during the communist revolution, it wasn't the communist revolution, it was the French Revolution, and then that morphed in the future into the communist revolution. But the French Revolution, the philosophers like Voltaire and Rousseau and others, they believed in that man's logic, that man's reason was God. And so they literally had this topless woman riding a horse through the streets of Paris, France, and she was called the goddess of reason, because they worshipped human reason. And yet, humanistic reason, human logic. The French Revolution started out with all these lofty ideas about building a paradise on earth, social justice, equal wealth redistribution. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? And they believed in all these humanistic ideals, this perfect society, this utopian society. But it was built on man's reason, man's logic, and science, or what they called science, or what could be termed scientism, as if science was like a religion, which actually it is. So, where did the lofty ideas of the French Revolution take them? Well, where it took them, and rather quickly, by the way, was their utopian society never came together, as they never do. Their society based on science, logic, and reason didn't produce social justice, didn't produce equal wealth redistribution, didn't produce some enlightened society at all. It produced one of the most extreme outbreaks of cruelty, violence, anarchy, immorality in history. So the French Revolution deteriorated into violent, drunken, angry mobs, and anarchy and lawlessness was in the streets of France and Paris. And the people would literally break down the doors of the churches to hold drunken sexual orgies in all hundreds of churches. I mean, night after night. And then it degraded. It kept degrading so that a French revolutionary terrorist, Robespierre, he would set up this large number of guillotines right in the center of Paris, and they would line people up who were considered to be enemies of the revolution. And the revolution, of course, was a revolution of reason and logic and science. And he would line up the people that they judged to be the enemies of the revolution. And they had huge rows of guillotines. And they would just chop people's heads off like crazy. And bloody heads were falling everywhere, caught in these giant baskets. And they were conducting mass beheadings through the guillotines. So that's where it went. That's where it went. It went into savagery. Now, when I was speaking in France, Paris, France, I was there, I don't know, a week or after the Charlie Hebdo attacks. And I was speaking at a church with like 20,000, something like 24,000, 30,000, some huge number of people that attended the church just outside Paris. And so one of the French Christians who was part of that ministry drove me around to show me like an insider's tour of Paris. And he knew where all these interesting locations were, and he knew a great deal about history, but he didn't understand or have knowledge about the secret history of Paris and France. And so when I heard him give me very important historical information as he showed me different monuments and statues and streets and things, I was able to explain to him and discover for myself, because I could see and recognize and understand all the occult symbolism, all the Illuminati symbolism, all the satanic symbolism, all the occult symbolism and statues and everything else that were just all over Paris, going back thousands of years. And no one had ever explained it to him. So, for example, when he showed me the exact area in Paris, France, where all the guillotines were lined up and there were the mass beheadings, where untold numbers of people were beheaded. And I was standing there on whatever the pavement was made out of. I think it was made out of like a marble because it was like a memorial. And I explained to him, as he explained to me, that you're standing on the exact location where all these guillotines were. I began to point to him these different statues, these different monuments that were right on the spot where the guillotines were, or right in the row where the guillotines were. So, in other words, these statues, these symbols, these pieces of architecture, these structures were deliberately placed on the site of the mass beheadings because people who are in the occult and Satanism and secret occult societies were communicating They were both conducting rituals on the area of land where the bloody beheadings took place. Because remember, when you have mass beheadings and heads being chopped off in blood, and I apologize for sounding like I'm reading from a script of some cheesy horror movie. I apologize for that. That's not my intention, but this is what really happened historically, and what these symbols really meant. So there's no way to slide around it. You got to deal with it. Okay, so I explained to him that these occultists, the Illuminati and others, these secret occult societies, the Satanists, deliberately put these monuments on the exact ground location where there was mass beheadings, because anyone who is a student of the occult, and I don't recommend that you become a student of the occult, knows that people in the occult and Satanism and occult worship, to them it's not just mass beheadings. It may appear to be mass beheadings for political reasons, revolutionary reasons, but it serves a deeper purpose in that all the tens of thousands of people who were murdered where I was standing with their blood becomes literally a human sacrifice to Satan and the powers of darkness. So, yes, it's the horror of a violent political revolution, but on a deeper level, when you study the history and the ideas behind the French Revolution, behind the French philosophers, and you really dig, you discover that the French Revolution was secretly orchestrated and financed and energized by the Illuminati, by Satanists, by people who were high up practitioners of the occult. And as such, all these beheadings were a human sacrifice designed to please Lucifer and bring into the physical earth manifestation supernatural demonic power. Because that's the way it works. You see, with Satanism and people in witchcraft and people in the occult and people into secret occult societies, going back to ancient Babylon and before, going to ancient Canaan with the Canaanites when Joshua and Caleb told God we were well able to take the land, and people's minds can't compute the fact that God is a loving God, especially when he commands Joshua and Caleb to go into the land of Canaan and specifically kill all the men, all the women, all the children, all the animals. Now, this freaks many people out, and you can understand why, because it sounds like the Christian God. If you don't really know what's going on, it sounds like the Christian God is just as bloody and barbaric and savage and cruel and monstrous as all the false gods and the occult gods. But that's not the case. You see, you have to understand. You cannot comprehend if your attempt to understand history. And by the way, I applaud anybody who makes the attempt to understand history, even if they don't come up with all the answers. You're to be applauded for making the attempt, because that pleases the Lord. You're developing your God-given gift of a mind and an intelligence which can be grown and used for his purposes. So, as I have written for decades in my books, because I've been pursuing the deeper truth of history for a long time, And when you go back to my books like The Day the Dollar Died and A Prophecy of the Future of America and a brand new book that you can still pre-order because it's going to be out relatively soon. And at least at this moment, you can still pre-order it and get a discount. If you pre-order now, my brand new book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World, which deals with these subjects intensively and then applies them to the greatest spiritual battle in the history of mankind, which is occurring right now as I speak and you're listening to me. The greatest spiritual battle in the history of mankind is raging all around us, and guess what? The vast majority of the Christian church has absolutely no clue that we're in a raging battle. And people who don't know God have no clue. But you know what's ironic? Is that on a percentage basis, there's more people involved in witchcraft and Satanism and occult secret societies who understand that we're in this greatest battle for mankind. There's more people in the occult that understand that than that are in the Christian church. That's a tragedy. So when you really dig deep or do the deep dive, you go all the way back to Mount Hermon, which, as I said the other day, when you're flying into Israel, off to the left is this massive mountain, snow-covered, and it's Mount Hermon. And Mount Hermon is where 200 fallen angels descended. That they became attracted to human women. They had sexual relations with human women. The fallen angels did. And when they mated with human women, there was the mixing of fallen angel DNA with human female DNA, creating a hybrid species called the Nephilim. And the descendants, well, the immediate descendants of the fallen angels and the human women were called the Rephaim, and the descendants of the Rephaim were called the Nephilim. And the Rephaim and Nephilim are soulless because they're not truly human. You see, first of all, God says in His Word, in the book of Leviticus and other areas, that it is an abomination to Him whenever you have different species trying to mate and produce offspring. That's an abomination to God. That's why God goes into such precise detail about the sins of bestiality and on and on and on, because it's an abomination to God that the DNA of a woman or the DNA of men and women would be mixed with an animal. And it's even a further abomination to God that the DNA of a fallen angel who's in rebellion from God, who mates with a human woman, creating a Rephaim hybrid species, and then the Nephilim hybrid species, which cannot have a human soul, because the only being that can have a human soul that can be saved, according to the Bible, according to God, is a human being. It's a law of God's creation that only human beings can be saved. And that means a human being, to qualify to be a human being, you have to have the genetic code of a human being, the DNA of a human being. When you mix those two together to create a hybrid species, that hybrid species, whatever you want to call it, does not have truly human DNA and a human genetic code. Therefore, it cannot have a soul, and therefore it cannot be saved. Salvation is exclusively available to human beings. Nobody else. And so the horror of this unlawful mating of fallen angels with human women is that you're producing a hybrid being that cannot be saved. And because it cannot be saved, and because it's genetically has the genetic nature of a fallen angel, it's not only mating with a human woman that has a fallen nature because of Adam and Eve, but the fallen nature of the human woman's DNA mixing with the fallen angel nature of fallen angel produces a soulless being, completely soulless, and evil by nature. Not just fallen, not just tempted to sin, evil by nature. So what happened was, when these fallen angels descended on Mount Hermon, not only did they mate with human women and produce genetic offspring that were hybrid, they gave science, advanced science, technology, mathematics, and all kinds of things to the human race. But then they multiplied in number. And if you created a map of ancient Phoenicia, ancient Sidon, etc., and then you look at how beings and cultures and humans and hybrids and Rephaim and Nephilim migrated, you'll see that the land of Canaan, and that doesn't mean that there weren't other approaches from fallen angels, not just exclusively from Mount Hermon, but fallen angels coming in through other different entrance points into the physical dimension. As I said, I believe this firmly, and I explain it in detail in many of my books. The fact that the Tower of Babel was an interdimensional portal, because the translation of Babylon means gate of the gods, or more accurately, gate of the fallen angels. And so, do fallen angels need a physical gate to get in somewhere? No, because fallen angels are coming in from another dimension. And so it's an interdimensional stargate. So the Tower of Babylon was an interdimensional stargate that allowed for the entrance of fallen angels or interdimensional beings into the earth. That's why it's called the Gate of the Gods. Now, so you have these different access points or portals or whatever, allowing entrance into the earth of fallen angels coming in from the spiritual world or the invisible realm or parallel universe, or however you choose to designate that dimension. And so, when God told Joshua and Caleb to conquer the land of Canaan, what was one of the first attributes when there were two groups of spies that went in, that God commanded to go in and spy or check out the land of Canaan and give God a report? So the first group of spies went into the land of Canaan, and they were relying on their human power and their human strength. Okay? They weren't relying on the power of God. In case you didn't know, I just want to drop you a little hint. You probably know this. And if you don't, you should know it. And when I say know it, I don't mean you just you can write it down in a sentence in your head. I mean, when I say know it, I'm saying something closer to the term when God speaks of a man knowing his wife in marriage, etc. And that word knowing actually means becoming one with her physically through the act of marriage. It's a deeper kind of knowing. So when I say you've got to know this truth, I'm talking about a deeper kind of knowing. So I would use the verbiage, you got to own this truth. You got to know it, but you got to make it yours. You have to have a revelation of it. You have to own it. There's a lot of Christians walking around that know about truth. They know about God, but they're powerless. And the reason they're powerless is because there's a huge difference between any person who knows about God or who knows about the Bible theologically versus the person who knows God personally, walks with God. The person who knows God, the person who walks with God, the person who knows the Word has a far more powerful, impactful, supernaturally transformable, that's not good English, but I think you know what I mean. The person who knows God can gain so much more truth than the person who knows about God. Because if you know about God, that implies that your relationship may be somewhat non-existent because it's a relationship that you have, maybe not intentionally, but it's a relationship that you're trying to establish from a long distance perspective. Okay? Now, talking to your friends via cell phone, business meetings, or talking via Skype with the video imagery, and Google now has its own Skype type system, and then there's Zoom and all these apps that allow you to communicate to people both video and sound. Okay, but as good as they are, any business person will tell you, and any true spiritual leader will tell you that there's a giant difference between communicating, knowing people through Skype and Google and Zoom and stuff, audio and video. There's a giant difference between that and actually physically being in the room with somebody. And it has to do with the fact that when you're in the room with somebody, you actually get to know them on a deeper level than just audio-video communication via technology. So it's like knowing about God is like Skyping God or using Google to communicate with God. When you're in the presence of a person, human to human, or in the presence of a group, you can pick up things about them, about their personality, about their soul and spirit that can only be experienced when you're physically in the same place as they are, looking at each other eye to eye. There's all kinds of things that you pick up, both in terms of your physical perceptions, but your spiritual perceptions. And a lot of Christians don't know that they have spiritual perceptions. And that's when you really know someone. See, no substitute for it. Same thing with God. All right, so the spies were sent in by God to spy out the land. And these spies were relying on their human energy or flesh, okay, which doesn't really cut it. So they saw the giants in the land. And let's remember, in terms of genealogy and genetic ancestry, that one of the attributes of Nephilim and Rephaim were that the male Nephilim and Rephaim were giants. They were huge. And you get different estimates, anywhere from 12 to 24 feet tall and stuff like that. And there's other things like having 6 fingers and capable of tremendously powerful physical warfare, and in many respects having a consciousness and an intellect that is supernaturally powerful. Because you see, when the fallen angels descended upon Mount Hermon, they had knowledge that man didn't have. They imparted to mankind information about science, advanced technologies, advanced mathematics, physics, biology, genetics, how to build technologies, medicine, herbs, all kinds of things. They say that's the reason why the ancient super civilizations, and many people believe Atlantis actually existed. But even if Atlantis didn't exist, Babylon existed, ancient Egypt existed, and many other super civilizations. And when you look at the structures, both Babylon and Egypt, Tower of Babel was pyramid shaped. A lot of people don't realize that. And the Egyptian pyramids were pyramid shaped. People don't understand that. And many people believe that the pyramid-shaped Tower of Babel, the Egyptian pyramids, the pyramids found under the Bahamas, the pyramidical structures, and all pyramidical architecture are called ziggurats. So if something is a ziggurat or in the shape of a ziggurat, it simply means it's in the shape of a pyramid. So they've discovered on the ocean floor near the Bermuda Triangle in the Bahamas, massive underwater cities with pyramids, and these pyramid structures all over the world under the frozen ice. The Mayan temples, the Incan temples, and on, stuff in Russia and Europe. Just, it's weird. And many people believe that the pyramid structure and the fact that with today's technology, we do not have technology today that's advanced enough to construct these massive pyramid structures like the Egyptian pyramids, because we do not have technology that can cut stone with that same mathematical precision and transport these massive pieces of cut stone large distances and then assemble them perfectly into a pyramid shape. We don't have that technology yet. And we don't, even with our technology and science today, we're still guessing at what the inner chambers of like the pyramids in Egypt were really all about and what they were for, because it's, if you use like the doofus approach to trying to understand something, you have a very cartoonish idea. No. The Egyptians were not stupid. They were building this structure for a far higher level reason than most people think. And many people think that these pyramids, which are often constructed on ley lines, energy lines in the earth, are conductors and vortexes of electromagnetic energy fields. So somehow, at least on a theoretical basis, people postulate that there may have been a global earthly civilization, perhaps Atlantis, who knows? And this global earthly civilization was lit up and had technology far more advanced than we think it had, and the pyramids were the key to the harnessing and distribution and transportation of this energy. Now, in case you think it's crazy, It's a lot crazier to believe the kind of lame explanations of modern science regarding what they claim is the answer to stuff. In addition to that, the Smithsonian Institution has these massive, massive, massive underground floors that are huge. I mean, I'm talking about, I have no words to describe how high, how tall, I mean, how massive these huge storage levels are under the Smithsonian Institute's building. And many of the floors are locked off because what they have done over who knows how many hundreds of years, plus buying and collecting artifacts from ancient civilizations, etc., they have literally confiscated, for example, the skeletons of the Nephilim and the Rephaim. They have confiscated ancient technologies. They have confiscated statues with mathematics on them. There's so much stuff that is being hidden from us. See, normally I wouldn't be like really interested in it if they were just like open about it. But the fact that they go out of their way to lock off these giant storage rooms, and they lock off caves and underground pyramid entrances where they have gathered all this scientific, technological, mathematical, there's a lot of stuff they don't want the common man to know about our existence. So they're hiding something. Now, the point is that these and Nephilim, they possessed, let's just say, supernatural, extraordinary powers and abilities. So when the spies went out to check out the land, they saw all these giants and they freaked out, and they came back to God and offered up to God an evil report. And they said, we can't conquer the land of Canaan because of the giants. The giants are too big. They'll destroy us. Okay? God considered their perception, which was one based on unbelief, and the unbelief actually came from a deeper rooted sin, which was they were trusting in their power and not God's power. So God considered their assessment an evil report. Then he sent in Joshua and Caleb, who spied out the land. And when Joshua and Caleb came back, they said to God that we looked at the giants, but we saw grasshoppers. And the so-called giants looked at us, and they saw us as giants and themselves as grasshoppers, which would be a faith-based perception. And they said to God, we are well able to take the land. And the reason Joshua and Caleb were well able to take the land was because they were operating within God's supernatural divine law, which is if you're putting your faith or your trust in your human energy and strength, the power of your flesh, the result is you're going to be filled with fear, you're going to fail, you're going to be defeated before you start. God's secret of supernatural power, you access God's supernatural power and wisdom, etc., when you're not inwardly trusting in your own abilities, strength, or the abilities of the flesh, because that's weak and limited. To the degree that you're trusting in God's infinite supernatural power and wisdom and strength is to the degree that you have no fear. You live in a zone of no fear. And all things are possible with God. So for Joshua and Caleb, it was like, no problem, God. We're going to take down these giants, but we see them as grasshoppers, and they said we're well able to take the land. But what's the root lesson there before we move on? Because you see, this root lesson is what we as individual Christians have to synchronize ourselves with God on. And it's this root lesson that the church in America has to sync itself up with God on. Or the result will be failure, defeat, enslavement, being conquered, being victimized, and on an individual basis and on the basis of the body of Christ and God's prophetic destiny for America, we will fail to realize God's prophetic destiny for America. We will fail to realize God's prophetic destiny in our lives if in our hearts what we're trusting in, what we're putting our faith in, is our own human intelligence, abilities, power, strength, money, government, anything that we're trusting in and looking to besides God is sin, and it's actually idolatrous worship, and it'll bring us down. That isn't to say that God doesn't use the acquisition of human knowledge, or God doesn't use human resources, etc. The point is, who is your ultimate source? In the bottom line of your life, who are you really trusting? In your strength and ability, and that of your flesh, in some human or man-made institution? Or is your trust, your faith, what you're syncing up to, is it really God? Because if it's not God, you may not realize it or not, but you're worshiping idols. This is not as complicated as it seems. I explain it a lot further in my brand new book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World, which you can pre-order now. And if you pre-order it now, you get a discount, plus you get a copy shipped to you before it's released to the general public, plus you get an autographed copy. Now, the book deals with intense stuff in terms of technology, supernatural forces, and stuff that many of you have never read about before, because it's very, very up to the second research. I mean, up to the second, especially about new technologies and things. Now, America is in the greatest danger that it's ever been in. The battle, the spiritual battle, is raging across the world and raging in America like never before. Okay, like never before. And you should be in the natural, sober-minded, awake, and vigilant, because there is great danger on the horizon. Now, that's not speaking unbelief and fear. That's speaking reality time. I don't know if you've ever gone to the top of the Empire State Building. Obviously, it's no longer the tallest building in Manhattan. At one time, when I was a kid, it was. So if you've gone to the top of the Empire State Building, they have a guardrail, but you can get up a bit and you can look down and you see, I don't know how many stories it is. It's just straight down to way, way, way down below is the black pavement of a New York City streets, and you see all these yellow-orange taxi cars and now Ubers and stuff and buses, and And because there's been some crazy people who thought they could fly and jumped off the top of the Empire State Building. And if you look down, you can imagine what would happen if you decided to have some delusional thought and you jumped. I don't know how many seconds it would take for you to free fall, but I do know that you would gather speed and then you would impact the pavement with such velocity that I'll just leave it there. Now, having a sober, reality-based understanding of the potential danger of putting your physical body in a dangerous position or too far to the edge or hanging over too far on top of the Empire State Building, you're moving, depending upon what you're doing, you're potentially moving to a danger point. So you need to have a very sober appraisal of exactly what would happen if you press the envelope too much. That's not fear. That's called sanity. Sanity is a good thing. If you don't have sanity, you need to start praying for it. That's a bad joke. I apologize. So, sanity is looking at what's happening in our country and knowing on the basis of what has happened to other nations before in relatively recent history how dangerous the place that we're in is. Because we have politicians promising things now that are the equivalent of nuclear bombs because they are, in order to get elected, they're making promises that they could never fulfill to people who are ignorant, desperate, and uneducated. And that is the seduction phase, by the way, of the spiritual deception of socialism, communism, and Marxism. It never delivers what it promised. It delivers the opposite: totalitarianism, losing all your rights, mass slaughter, starvation, just horrors that are unspeakable. We've never lived in an America before. We have never lived in an America before that moving into that kind of totalitarian nightmare dictatorship was even remotely on the table. And it wasn't because we always had such great governments. It's because that the American people, whether they were simple people or just working class or middle class or whatever, the American people as a whole had a general common sense about life, about government, about law, about freedom. They had a general common sense attitude based on the fact that, guess what? They actually taught history, not human sexuality, in the classroom. So they got some education on history. They got some education on what different economic systems do. And they saw black and white films or photographs or whatever, or read books that actually told you the truth about history instead of, propagandizing you and indoctrinating you with just total insanity. But now we have a nation of people that have been indoctrinated with total insanity. They've been psychologically dumbed down, and therefore they're clueless. They can't make an intelligent appraisal. What should be an obvious mental process for them is elusive. I mean, all you have to do is listen to the answers of the millennial generation. College educated, non-college educated. They're polled by a big pollster, and all the millennials answer overwhelmingly. Like 98% of the millennial generation says, we believe that communism and Marxism would be the best economic philosophies by which to run the United States. I mean, that's like, you should be in an insane asylum for saying that. Okay? communist revolutions in the last 125 years killed, raped, tortured, starved to death a total of 240 million people. I go into this with a vengeance in my book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World. I go into it with a vengeance because I'm tired. It's not an anger thing. It's a concern thing. It's a responsibility thing. I cannot sit by and allow, at least to whatever I can do, I cannot sit back and do nothing as people are being indoctrinated with propaganda and stupidity that has the very real potential of turning America, the land of the free, the home of the brave, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the American dream, into some kind of Frankenstein monster totalitarian state. You have friends that can do that. I can't do that. You probably know pastors who can preach on nothing all day and do that. I can't do that. I could not. I don't claim to be perfect, but I couldn't put my head on the pillow at night not having spoken out and doing everything I could possibly do to educate people, to teach people, to lead them to Christ, to give them a biblical worldview, so that God's prophetic destiny for America can be realized. When you talk to the average Christian, they don't even have a clue that God has a special prophetic destiny for America. And he's waiting on our response. And that prophetic destiny, in part, is contained in the commandment of Jesus Christ for us to occupy the land until he comes. But you know why the average Christian has no clue whatsoever what God's prophetic destiny for America is? They've never heard a Bible teacher, a pastor, a seminary professor, a ministry, or some Christian organization or leader ever teach them that God had a prophetic destiny for America. So, it doesn't take the IQ of Albert Einstein to figure out that if you've never been taught what God's prophetic destiny is for America based on the Word of God, then how could you possibly fulfill God's prophetic destiny for America? That's why it's in my new book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World, because this is where the spiritual battle is raging, right inside the hearts and minds of mankind. This is the greatest battle in the history of the world. And what are some of the components of the battle? Ignorance, the war between ignorance and knowing what God's prophetic destiny is for America. So I teach people in fast-moving, understandable ways. But if you, listening to the Paul McGuire Report, cannot, right off the cuff, deliver a couple of minute communication to people who ask, or seed what God's prophetic destiny is for America, then I challenge you to step up to the plate and educate yourself in the things of God. Because, look, we don't have the luxury of missing the mark here. We're at the crossroads right now. Right now, America is at the crossroads. One manufactured crisis. Look, right now as I'm talking to you, and I shouldn't have, if you've read my books on a consistent basis, and this is not just a little slick way of promoting my books, but if you've read my books on a consistent basis, where I talk about many, many different subjects, you would know exactly what I'm talking about when I make an oblique reference to things that are happening in the news right now. And if you think those things are accidental or happen chance or spontaneous or random, then you lack knowledge. So you ought to plug your dumb TV And you know what? Invest a little bit in a spiritual, practical education and read some of my books so you get up to speed. Because when you're looking at the television set and you're watching the propaganda and the brainwashing and the indoctrination, and if you believe the baloney that they're telling you as to why this happened and that happened, you don't have knowledge. There is an agenda. Let's just put it this way. Nothing that is happening on television is the product of random chance, accident, coincidence, or whatever. It's being scientifically engineered. And I prove that, and I document it in my books like Conquering the Matrix, the greatest battle for the hearts and minds of mankind in the history of the world. I prove it. I bring it home. And I've done that with the books that I've written with Troy Anderson, like the Babylon Code and Trumpocalypse. You know, it just blows my mind. Whatever you think of Donald Trump is one thing, okay? But whatever you think about him should be based on a biblical process of evaluating the man's life and a knowledge of the Bible about what kind of leader God chooses and what kind of leader God rejects. And your opinion and my opinion doesn't mean a hill of beans. Your ignorant Christian friends' opinions don't mean a hill of beans. And the mainstream media's propaganda doesn't mean a hill of beans. What means a hill of beans and a lot more is God's perspective. And when you read historically the lifestyles and about the individuals that God raised up to save his people in crisis times, let me just put it this way. In no way, shape, or way is Donald Trump disqualified. And if you've disqualified him, then you haven't read your Bible and you don't even know what the Bible teaches. No, I'm serious. And there's another thing. Why do you think it is? You shouldn't even have to read the Bible for this. This is just using your logical, rational mind and choosing. God gives us free choice. People act like, oh, Christians are uptight and they got all these rules and regulations. That's the biggest lie I've ever heard in my life. The God that we serve, the God of love, Jesus Christ, unlike all the other mystical religions, unlike witchcraft, unlike Satanism, unlike communism and socialism and all that stuff, the God that we serve, he gives us free will and free choice. Total free choice, total free will. Because the God that we serve doesn't want a bunch of robots worshiping him. So God is so radical in his giving to us free will and free choice that he will literally allow us to kill him, as we did when we crucified him, to disobey his laws, to look in his face with anger and shout, "We don't believe in you," to mock his words. God is so radical in his total giving us of free will that he will allow us to do things that are totally against his will, because he's given us free will. That means you got the free will to do what's right and the free will to do what's wrong. These other systems and religions, they don't give that. So here's what we have to understand. Just from the basis of street sense, common sense, who would have the most to benefit by all these conservatives, all these conservative Christians organizing a movement that's anti-Trump And all these conservatives and all these conservative Christians trying to organize a third party so they can have their version of a Christian conservative candidate run against Trump. Now, if you can't do the math on that, I'm not speaking to you personally, so it's not like I'm not insulting you because this is not a personal statement. It's a general statement. So I'm not insulting anyone personally. But if you can't do the math on why Christians and Christian conservatives would organize, rally, donate money to run what they think would be a better conservative Christian candidate for president, if you can't figure out the math on that, then guess what? You're a moron. Doing that will only accomplish one thing. Only one thing. There's not multiple options. Doing that will accomplish one thing. It will guarantee that the Democratic choice for president will win the election, most likely by a slam dunk. So by going the route of the Christian conservatives and Christians who want to run a third-party candidate against Trump, all they're doing is 100%. They might as well just vote for the Democratic candidate because that's exactly what's going to happen. And any other scenario is a fantasy. Because look, a third-party candidate, no matter how gifted, no matter how charismatic, no matter how pure you think his or her conservative ideas or Christian ideas are, they cannot win. A third-party candidate cannot win at this time in history. And has never won before. And we had some people with big bucks like Perot and others. The only thing a third-party candidate will do, and this is what has been the purpose of third-party candidates historically, is to deliberately destroy one of the candidates' number of votes. In this case, running a third-party conservative Christian candidate would erode the number of votes that Trump could get and guarantee that the Democratic Party will win. And along with the Democratic Party, the platform that the Democrats champion, which is socialism, Marxism. So knowing that, and if you don't know that, again, you're a moron because it's readily available information. Knowing that, how could you possibly even entertain that as a responsible idea? And then let's take it further. The only way this so-called spontaneous movement that seems to be rising to whatever degree of a third party independent conservative or conservative Christian candidate running for president against Trump. The only thing that could possibly be energizing that is that super billionaires like George Soros and other super liberal democratic leftist billionaires are secretly under the table financing the movement and financing the political candidate for a third-party Christian conservative candidate. And probably the majority of people who would follow along with that don't know the secret truth that it's being financed by a George Soros or some super liberal billionaire. They wouldn't know that. But there are enough people who are politically very sophisticated and smart, who know how the game is played. And I guarantee you, if they were offered, for example, personally, like I'm talking about heavy hitting political operatives, if they were offered personally like $2 million, just personally, for developing a campaign to beat Trump with a conservative Christian candidate, and they personally get $2 million apiece. And on top of that, whoever they choose to select as the better conservative Christian candidate, they get a massive amount of millions of dollars to run their campaign, buy ads, etc. So they're getting their campaign monetized, and they personally are making some big bucks. So you need to think about that. You need to think about that. All right, so the danger we're in, and this is what I try to stress in The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World. We are in a time unlike any other time in human history. We've never been down the road like this before, because there's a convergence of very unique and completely different circumstances that have never gathered together before, like a nightmare perfect storm. Because right now, whether we like it or not, we are facing a nightmare perfect storm coming at us. And to say it's anything less than a nightmare perfect storm is to be naive and delusional. First of all, we have the reality that there are a lot of people in America that are angry, that they're frustrated. Some of their reasons are legitimate. Some of their reasons have been stirred up through psychological manipulation and propaganda. They're being used. But there's some real substance to their anger and complaints. Okay? And the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, in truth, are both responsible for creating the fuel of this anger. And that is the fact that because of the secret trade treaties that have been going on for the last, before they even decided to call them trade treaties, there were secret trade deals being made between America and other nations. Later on, they were called NAFTA and GATT and stuff. But people like David Rockefeller and other globalist elite, for example, as I talk about this in the book, facts you've never heard about before regarding the true purpose of communist China and Chairman Mao as a a mechanism for the globalist elite to increase their wealth and total control and power over the human race. So this is what they did. China was artificially, look, I hope you know, and I explain it and document it in the book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World. It's an historical documented fact that the international banking families, the big banks of Wall Street, the big financial firms in America, financed both Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party during World War II, and they also financed the Allies, America, France, Great Britain, as they fought against Hitler. All right? That's a fact. It's a fact that the Bolshevik or communist revolution in Russia was completely financed by the international banking families of London and some of the wealthiest capitalist families in the world. Okay, so Wall Street and some of the wealthiest capitalist super families in the world financed the bloody communist revolution of 1917, where like 50, 60 million people were killed, starved to death, shot. And it was a nightmare. And it remains a nightmare. Who bankrolled it? The peasants in Russia didn't want it. The globalist elite sent in two losers, Trotsky and Stalin. And they sent them in with these giant railroad cars that had like endless amount of railroad cars attached to one another. And what were in these gigantic railroad cars coming down the tracks through Europe and the mountains into Russia, they had massive stockpiles of guns, bullets, grenades, machine guns, bombs. Okay, just a massive military arsenal was jam-packed in car after car after car, these endlessly long trains. And then, in car after car after car of these endlessly long trains, were huge stacks of wrapped cash, American dollars, worth millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. And both Trotsky and Stalin were paid millions of dollars. And so the communist peasants didn't want to do a communist revolution. So these guys had so much money given to them by Wall Street and the international bankers that they paid and purchased an army of thugs, ex-convicts, rapists, murderers. They paid an army of criminals and armed them heavily to be their so-called communist revolutionaries, and they would move very slowly from town to town, conquering it through the criminals who had guns and weapons. And it took a long time. It took about 2 years. And then eventually, after a long struggle, but the people still didn't want it, this army of rapists, murderers, criminals, heavily armed, getting paid money from the international bankers. Russia reached the tipping point, and the peasants knew that they knew the Tsar was going to be arrested. They knew the Tsar's government and his soldiers would collapse. And these paid communist revolutionaries basically said, you better make your choice now while you still can, because now's your choice. If you don't join us now voluntarily and join our communist revolution, then after we finish killing off the Tsar's army, we're going to kill you off. So sign up now and declare yourself a member of the Communist Party. And that's what they did. And they hated it. Life was horrible under the communists. But you see, same thing happened in communist China. I was reading today, because I'm including some quotes from David Rockefeller, who wrote a big op-ed piece in the New York Times in 1973, where he was literally praising communist China, praising the communist revolutionary leader Chairman Mao for the outstanding job, the incredible success, the bright light of hope that the communist Chinese revolution brought to the world. Now, whatever you think about David Rockefeller, he's not stupid. This is the late David Rockefeller. He's not stupid. He knew exactly what really happened during the communist revolution. But he's revealing something. He's revealing something very important. He's revealing how members of the globalist elite, the international banking families, the ruling class of the world, the shadow government of the world, how they perceive reality, how they perceive these communist revolutions through their eyes. See, because through their eyes, because they think of themselves as a scientific dictatorship based on the Greek philosopher Plato's idea of the 7 philosopher kings that ruled Atlantis, which the elite believe existed. And I expose secrets about that in the brand new book, by the way. So, from David Rockefeller and the perspective of the globalist elite, these communist revolutions were successful because their measurements for success are totally different than mine and yours. So you see, Chairman Mao killed 60 million people, and the latest historical records said he did it like he enjoyed doing it. It was sadistically done. So he was killing them, he was torturing them, raping them, starving them to death. For any minor infraction, they would be shot on the spot. It was a bloodbath. He took away all their freedoms, and he made communist China a hell, a living hell to live in. And boasted about it in his quotes. And yet, in the New York Times article, David Rockefeller is praising him for being one of the greatest leaders in mankind and liberating and creating a perfect society, and how America should be more like China. I mean, it's like, wow, this is really weird. But it's not really weird, as I reveal and expose in the book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind. The fact that David Rockefeller, the international bankers, and the globalist elite see things like Chairman Mao's communist revolution as an extremely positive thing. They see the Russian communist revolution as an extremely positive thing. And they secretly see many of the aspects of Adolf Hitler's Nazi dictatorship. Secretly, they won't talk about it, but privately, they secretly celebrate many of the things that he did, which again reveals their perspective, which is different than yours and mine. Yours and mine perspective would be based on a biblical worldview. You know, like, how much good do these governments do for the people? You know, do they feed the hungry, clothe the poor? Do they give them freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press? Do they give them dignity? Do they do things for them like our Bible-inspired Constitution and Bill of Rights do for us, where it says, and the Creator has given us certain inalienable rights, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You see, David Rockefeller and the globalist elite and the international bankers, see, I tell the truth in my books. In The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind, I tell the truth. Why is it, think about this for a moment, and I explain it in detail, and I reveal things that I'm not talking about now, but why is it that you don't hear the globalist elite, the tech billionaires, the super wealthy, the wealthiest family in the world, okay? Why is it you never hear them affirming and celebrating our Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and Bill of Rights that come from a biblical worldview? They're always trying to destroy it and replace it with like a communist government. Why is that? It's because they're looking at it from another point of view. Now, I document what I say, and I go in a lot heavier and deeper than I have time to now. But I have to at least open this up, some of it. They look at it to be blunt through the eyes of Satan. That's my personal opinion. Because you see, to them, success is, how can we totally control the masses? How can we totally make slaves out of the masses? How can we take all the wealth and energy of the masses so that they will serve us like slaves? See, that's how they measure success. Now, they're not going to go out and say it plainly, but it's clear. It's clear. Aldous Huxley talked about the scientific dictatorship, which again I go into detail in my book with. Scientific dictatorship is the fact that an elite, which goes directly back to Plato and the philosopher kings of Atlantis, a scientific elite or a scientific dictatorship controls society through scientific mind control. That's what Huxley talked about. And in scientific mind control, you can program the masses to be your slaves, to serve you as slaves. But if your programming is expert enough, you can brainwash the masses to have absolutely no idea that they are slaves. You can program the masses to literally love their duties as slaves and never question anything. See? Now, Huxley was a member of the elite, and his ideas were used by the communists and the Marxists and the Chairman Maos and stuff. So from the viewpoint of a Huxley, it's a great thing to enslave the people with brainwashing, because they won't even know that they've been enslaved. See, they celebrate that. To them, that's a measurement of success. In fact, he calls it, in the truly effective scientific dictatorship, you can program people so hypnotically. He actually uses the word, in the truly effective scientific dictatorship, which also implies that in an ineffective scientific dictatorship, you would fail to program and hypnotize the masses into loving their slavery. You would fail pulling the wool over their eyes, and you would fail enslaving them. And they might actually discover what freedom is and do things to keep and get their freedom. That would not be considered successful to the elite, to David Rockefeller, the globalist elite, the Aldous Huxleys. So, David Rockefeller is praising. You would have thought that, really, the way David Rockefeller was praising communist China and the communist revolutionary leader Mao, you would have thought he was talking all about America in 1776 with the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and all the powerful blessings and great things that created America. That's what you would have thought David Rockefeller was praising. No. Think about this. This is like psychopathically evil. This is like the mind of a serial killer. He's praising. He writes this article in the New York Times. New York Times, of course, doesn't criticize him. They give him huge pages to say his stuff. And he praises the Communist Chinese Revolution, and he praises Chairman Mao. And historians call the Communist Chinese Revolution and Chairman Mao the greatest mass murder in human history and the greatest mass murder in human history. That is what historians categorize the Communist Chinese Revolution, which David Rockefeller is praising. Why? Because 45 million people were shot, killed, starved to death, tortured, and murdered. 45 million people were killed and slaughtered, sadistically, with enjoyment and cruelty. That number is so high, 45 million people, that it exceeds the death toll of the Communist Revolution in Russia and the Nazi National Socialist Revolution in Germany under Adolf Hitler. Chairman Mao was a monster. You should read what he wrote. He loved it. They enslaved the people. They took away all their rights. They made them work for slave labor. Okay? And then David Rockefeller goes on and on about how unified they are. Of course they're unified, you idiot. They're terrified of being tortured or shot to death. It's obvious. But David Rockefeller's not stupid. He knows exactly what happened. He knows the real story of what happened. And this is what I try to communicate in the book. This is like what I'm praying that the Lord will turn the light bulb on in people's hearts and minds when they read the greatest battle for the hearts and souls of mankind in the history of the world. What I'm praying for is that they will see through the darkness to the truth and the light. You see, Christians don't really believe their Bibles. They don't believe that man is really a fallen creature. They don't believe that there's a real devil, a real Satan, real fallen angels, and a real Lucifer and real evil. They don't realize that they've been tricked and seduced by the deception of humanism, which says all men are basically good, and it's the environment that makes them bad. That is a demonically dangerous false belief. You see, looking at these things through the eyes of the globalist elite like David Rockefeller, who, by the way, as I explained to you in the book, and this is not just David Rockefeller, this concerns a lot of these international banking families, super wealthy families. David Rockefeller, and I'm very cautious about talking or describing events that happen in people's lives, but David Rockefeller was one of the people that financed and was one of the people who acted as a director for an organization on the grounds of the United Nations called Lucifer Trust. Now, Lucifer Trust, and by the way, it was the Rockefeller family that financed the building of the United Nations in Manhattan for the purpose of a one world government. Rockefeller was an important part of Lucifer Trust. What was Lucifer Trust? It was created by Alice Bailey, the occult and satanic disciple of the satanic teacher, Madame Blavatsky. And the purpose of Lucifer Publishing was to educate and recruit world leaders through the United Nations to be part of what the Luciferians call the plan. And actually, the full expression is it's the plan to develop a satanic environment which will allow for what they call, quote, the externalization of the hierarchy. Now, what they mean by, what the occultists like Lucifer Publishing mean by the externalization of the hierarchy is that they believe in and they summon demonic powers and demons because they're Satanists. And the externalization of the hierarchy refers to the fact that there's a hierarchy ruling planet Earth that consists of high-level demons, but they're invisible because they exist in the spiritual world. But at some point, through Luciferian practices and satanic rituals, this demonic hierarchy will manifest itself and become visible in the physical world, thus the term the externalization of the hierarchy. I mean, this is heavy-duty satanic stuff. Now, if you read your Bible, it shouldn't surprise you because Lucifer is the temporary god of this world, and we're in a spiritual warfare with Lucifer and the fallen angels and the demons. It's God versus Lucifer. It's the angels of God versus the fallen angels. There's the human followers of Lucifer, and there's the human followers or believers in Jesus Christ. We're in a spiritual war. So Lucifer Publishing was designed to evangelize, if you will, world leaders at the United Nations to recruit them into Satanism and the hardcore high-level satanic activities like the externalization of the hierarchy, which means externalizing, bringing into physical reality these high-level demons that are ruling the earth, which is what the Bible talks about. Now, there were so many complaints when Lucifer Publishing was created at the United Nations, especially because the title of the organization used the word Lucifer, that they had to move Lucifer Publishing off the grounds of the United Nations. And they relocated to a new building close to the United Nations and changed the name of their organization from Lucifer Publishing to Lucis Trust. Kind of a more subtle verbiage. But that plan is still moving forward. And here in America and around the world, there is a vast, behind-the-scenes, satanic, Luciferian, witchcraft, occult network that is operational. Many of the heads of the international banking families are part of it. Some of the highest level politicians are part of it. Some of the richest families in the world are part of it. And they are in an organized effort using multiple attack fronts. They list out their goals, by the way, to destroy Christianity, to destroy marriage, to destroy moral values like an absolute right and an absolute wrong, to destroy nationalism or patriotism. And what they want instead is exactly what the book of Revelation warns against. They want a one world government under Antichrist, a one world religion under the false prophet, and a one world economic system with the mark of the beast 666 under the false prophet. So they will have their Lucifer, so that Lucifer can go into the rebuilt temple in Jerusalem, sit down on the throne of God, and demand that the world worship him as God. This is where it's going. And so America, this is what Christians don't know. From what I explained, and you know what? You need to buy caseloads of the book and distribute it. You need to buy multiple copies, and you need to not just, put your coffee cup on it. You need to read it. And then you need to own the truth in it and act on it. It's heavy. It's very intense. But there's a lot of supernatural power and hope in the promises of God and how to achieve and walk in spiritual victory. And I believe that we're in a winnable war, by the way. So here's the key message I'm trying to communicate. And I document it from the very beginning of America. There were two plans established for the future of America in the 1600s. We had the covenant that the Pilgrims and Puritans made with God when they dedicated America to God, the biblical God. They made a covenant with God in the 1600s, which God honored. And that's why our nation prospered. And that's why we have all the freedoms we have. And that's why at this moment, God has a prophetic destiny for America. It's based on the spiritual prayers and worship of our spiritual founding fathers, the Pilgrims and Puritans in the 1600s. But secretly, with nobody looking, at the exact same time period, when the boats were coming in from England and other places of Europe, with the Pilgrims and Puritans escaping religious persecution from both the Church of England and the Catholic Church because they wanted to worship the biblical God in the biblical way, they came to America and set up these colonies. There was a guy, and I'm only telling you a little bit of it. The whole story is going to blow your mind, and the whole story is in the greatest battle for the hearts and minds of mankind in the history of the world. There was one of the most powerful occult teachers in all the world alive at the same time that this was happening. His name was Sir Francis Bacon. He was head of the Rosicrucian movement, which later became the Illuminati. He was a high-level occultist. He was the personal spiritual advisor to the Queen of England, and he had enormously powerful political and financial connections. He was a genius, an author, a scientist, but he was a heavy-duty occultists that communicated with demons and got supernatural guidance, supernatural intelligence, and supernatural understanding from the secret satanic worship he engaged in. Sir Francis Bacon believed that America was destined to be the new Atlantis. I want you to pay attention to those words. New Atlantis. You see, because there's a secret occult connection between the Greek philosopher Plato and his teachings on Atlantis, and how the elite, like Rockefeller, are very synced up with that. And Sir Francis Bacon's occult vision that America was destined to become the new Atlantis. And then Sir Francis Bacon also believed that America was destined to become the head of the new world order, which will be an occult Luciferian new world order. Like on the back of the US dollar, the pyramid with the all-seeing eye of Lucifer and the words in Latin, New World Order, at the base of the pyramid. So there's been this spiritual war going on since the 1600s in America. The Illuminati was founded in 1776. Now, right now, as I speak to you, there is the greatest convergence of spiritual forces from the side of God and Jesus and the angels and believers in Jesus Christ and the true church of Jesus Christ, who are in spiritually mortal spiritual warfare with Lucifer, the fallen angels, the different rankings of demons, and all of Lucifer's human servants, including the high-level ones that have sold their souls to Lucifer in exchange for money, wealth, and power. What is happening in America socially, sexually, in terms of media, in terms of politics, in terms of economics, in terms of the apostasy that's exploding in the church, the spiritual deception that's coming upon our land, and most importantly, the raging, all-out raging spiritual warfare that's going on right now in the hearts and minds of teenagers and children and adults and young adults. There's this raging warfare between Satan and God for the hearts and minds of mankind. This is the greatest spiritual battle in the history of the world. But here's the thing. Jesus Christ commanded us to occupy the land until he comes. For us as Christians in America, we're commanded by Jesus to occupy America spiritually until Jesus Christ comes again. Why is God so insistent upon that? Because God Almighty has a supernatural destiny for America in the last days. But on the other side, the occult has a secret occult destiny for America. And there's about to be a spiritually violent clash like you've never seen before. This spiritually violent clash will manifest itself in the physical realm in many ways that I explain it in my new book. Now, I didn't say that to frighten you. I said it to wake you up. I said that, and this is not, it's an attempt on my part to give myself some spiritual stature. If you know me, you know that I avoid ascribing to myself titles. Okay, I don't do it. You know that. But one title I will say that I will talk about publicly, and I'm not the only one who's been given this call. It's not really a title. Let's call it a call, and that's why I feel freer to share it, because it's not a title. It's a call. and that is to be a faithful watchman on the wall for the Lord. And God has raised up many people to do that. But remember, the faithful watchman has to go up in the tower where the camp of Israel is. And he has to keep a vigilant lookout for any sneak attacks from the enemy that would attempt to come in and attack the camp of Israel, the women, the wives, the children, the men, and slaughter them if they're not prepared. So the watchman has to stay awake. He has to vigilantly keep his eyes open, constantly scouring the land to see if he can see the enemies coming in from a distance. And then it's his job before the Lord, the minute he sees the enemy coming in from the distance, to take up the ram's horn or the shofar and blow this loud trumpet so loudly that it awakens all of Israel, because they know what the meaning of the blowing of the shofar, the trumpet, means. It's a warning that the enemy is coming from the distance, and Israel has been trained that they must immediately prepare for attack and warfare. So they close the gates, they arm themselves, they get militarily buttoned down so that the enemy cannot slaughter them and conquer them, and so that they can defeat the enemy. But it's all contingent based on the willingness of the watchman to be faithful. However, what God says to the watchman is that if you are vigilant and you keep your eyes open and you stay awake and you're faithful to spot the enemy of my people coming from the distance, and you faithfully blow the shofar and the trumpet and do everything you can in your power to wake my people up, he said, if my people choose to ignore the warning of the watchman and go back to sleep, and if my people choose to just, not pay attention to your warnings, then I will hold my people and my leaders responsible for the blood of my people on their hands for the slaughter. But he said, but if you, watchmen, fall asleep or fail to spot the enemy coming from the distance, and you fail to warn my people of what I assigned you to keep a lookout for, and then my people get slaughtered because you didn't blow the shofar or the trumpet, then the Lord tells the watchman, I will hold you personally accountable for the blood of my people on your hands. And so, not on the basis of title, on the basis of a call from God, which others have also, I do this radio program, I do the video, Paul McGuire Ministries, Paradise Mountain Church. The books, like the new one, is the loudest trumpet I've ever blown in any book I've written. The greatest battle for the hearts and minds of mankind in the history of the world. In it is the warning. Okay? That is the trumpet. I'm not the only one blowing a trumpet. There are others too. But in the book is a trumpet, a call to action, and it's clear, and people will either heed it or not. But at least I have done my job before the Lord. And so I ask that you order it immediately and get it at a financial discount if you pre-order it now by going to paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. Also, again, spread the links of these programs far and wide. There is deliberate, methodical censorship going on the internet that's attempting to block out all Christian Bible prophecy communication, conservative ideas. There's a war against the truth. Don't be naive. A lot of these, I'm not going to name any companies' names. So, the hour is critical. I know so many things that I can't say now. There's things that have changed in the last 2 months that I can't talk about. And you need to know that my message is not one of hopelessness and despair. The whole reason God has called me to give this message out and to give the message out in the book The whole reason for it is that it's God's will and desire that his people respond to the shofar, to the trumpet, and that they obey the command of Jesus Christ to occupy the land until he comes, spiritually occupy, meaning don't allow the demons and the powers of darkness to run America. Allow the Holy Spirit and the Word of God and God's people to run America based on love. So this is not a message of hopelessness. This is a message that boils down to this. If we choose to hear the trumpet of the watchman, which is blowing right now, and we choose to obey what God is calling us to do, each one of us, and we choose to occupy the land until he comes, and that's doable, and it's a winnable war. Otherwise, Jesus Christ, Jesus would not have called us to occupy the land if he did not give us his power, and we are well able to occupy and conquer the land. In other words, let's just do it again. Jesus Christ would never have called us to occupy the land, America, if he did not already give us the power to win this winnable spiritual war and successfully occupy the land. In other words, it's doable. It's not impossible. We mock God if we give God an evil report in response to God's command for us to occupy the land. And when I bring this up, I can't tell you how many times I'll get a Christian leader or a Christian who will adamantly, they don't realize what they're doing, they'll argue against obeying Jesus, commanding us to occupy the land until he comes. And they don't realize that their entire argument is what the Lord calls an evil report, which the unbelieving spies gave him when he commanded them to conquer Canaan. So this is a winnable war. And I'd like to remind you that it just takes a dedicated minority, 4% or 8% of a remnant church, and we can turn the tide of what's going to happen in America. But in order for that to happen, we must repent. We must cry out to God. We must evangelize and save souls. We must make disciples of all nations. And we need to be very busy and intentional about communicating and educating people to the message. That's why I do the radio program, the video, and the book. So communications, or psychological warfare, or in this case, spiritual warfare, is the most important part of any battlefield. Ours is a spiritual battlefield. So I thank you for praying for me and my family and the ministry. And I ask you continually to engage in spiritual warfare on behalf of the ministry, on behalf of my family and me, because your spiritual warfare is what makes victory possible. I thank you for distributing these messages far and wide to do an end run around the censorship of the internet. That's how people get saved. They come to the Lord, they become educated. And I constantly talk to people who somehow mysteriously ended up listening to the Paul McGuire Report from all of the United States and the world. And then I thank those of you that are willing to go to God first and ask him, Lord, how much do you want me to donate or contribute to Paradise Mountain Church, Paul McGuire Ministries? How often do you want me to give? And then you specifically ask the Lord, what amount, Lord, do you want me to give or donate to Paul McGuire Ministries, Paradise Mountain Church? And I thank you for obeying this simple spiritual principle, which is before you make up your mind about what you're going to do or how much you're going to give, you're humble enough and childlike enough in your faith, which is a good thing, to go to the Lord and ask him first, Lord, show me what to do, how much to give, how often, how much to donate, how much to contribute. And that pleases the heart of God. And we both know why, because if we're going to make up our minds beforehand how much we're going to give, how often we're going to give, or concerning any area of life, If we're going to make up our minds beforehand without first consulting the Lord, then let's be honest, and we've all been guilty of it. Let's be honest. Then it's kind of ridiculous to go to the Lord to ask him, Lord, how much do you want me to give? How often? How much do you want me to donate to Paradise Mountain Church, Paul McGuire Ministries? If we've already made up our mind, I mean, what's the point of asking him if we've made up our mind by ourselves? I'm not saying that to be unkind. I'm saying we've all done that. And in any area of life, we need to teach ourselves and remind ourselves is that first we ask the Lord with childlike faith, and we humble ourselves by the Lord. And then after the Lord puts something on our heart or speaks to us, then we can go to the Lord and ask him. And it's not asking him twice. We want to confirm, Lord, did I get it right? You told me to do this and that. I'm willing to do it, Lord. I'm willing to obey you right now. Well, that blesses the Lord. But it doesn't bless the Lord regarding any area of life if we make up our mind apart from the Lord, based on our own flesh, and then go to the Lord and ask him for guidance because we're playing games. We're really not going to do what the Lord tells us to do because we've already decided what we're going to do. And I'm not saying that to pick on anyone because we have all done that in different ways in our life. But this is a serious time. This is a time where God has given us the grace to move. So we need to move quickly with the intentionality of victory. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us.